this is all about communication. It's not about FM broadcast. Um, so uh, I don't know where to begin. I've got so much information in my head to share, and I could probably teach. I'm not patting myself on the back, but I could probably teach a college level class on audio, um, having done all of that for years and years. Um, what we're trying to do is overly simplified. We're trying to put a round peg in a square hole. That's the goal here. The round peg being our voice, which is changing in amplitude, in frequency, and we have a limited space to put that voice in. Think of it as the going down the road. We're driving a car down the road. The car is 5 times the width of the road. We need to narrow it down at certain spots and also make it corner properly at whatever speed is posted so that it stays on the road and it's stable. And that's our goal. That's what we're doing with the audio. Yeah. So um, you know, the first thing you do, we've always said in broadcast is we have a phrase, garbage in, garbage out. In other words, it doesn't matter how much equalization you put on the thing, it doesn't matter how much compression, noise gate, all of these fancy boxes, these things that we can do to sweeten the audio. If we're not talking into the mic correctly, then everything else after that isn't going to undo. It's not going to be able to fix the garbage that we're putting into the mic. It doesn't really apply to the ham community, and I'll try to focus in on that. But the first thing I would say is remove the room echo. We've all heard from ham and maybe from 11 meters. We've heard somebody with a D104 lollipop microphone with the gain all the way up, and we hear the room and they're talking at arm's length away from the microphone, and we can hear this huge room going on. And a little bit is good, too much is not good, because you get the echo and it's distracting. Well, we're looking for the not the again, not the broadcast part of it. We're looking at clarity. We're trying to get the communication through. Remember, we're trying to overcome static, QRM, all kinds of other noise, fading, DX, all of this anomalies that go on in the ionosphere. So our goal is to make our audio as loud, consistent, and good diction to slice through that like a hot knife on butter. So I hear I'm going to go the opposite end of the spectrum here. I hear a lot of people that have, flex radios, anons, and I'm not throwing those under the bus. I know you have one, and they're fantastic. I'm envious. I wish I had one. Um, but a lot of operators turn the bass up so far because what they're hearing is they're trying to emulate FM commercial broadcast. And that's ESSB. I get it. And for those people, that's great. And the AM group does a wonderful job also. They really know a lot about, microphones and how to make things sound good. But for normal SSB contact, you really don't want all of that bass. If you look at the Fletcher Munson curves, I don't know if you've got a chance to look at those. Um, these are two engineers that worked at ATT Bell Labs back in the day, and Bob Heil has talked about them considerably, these two. They did extensive research on how the ear actually hears audio. And what you overly summarized, what you basically want to do is you want to what we call pre-emphasize. You want to boost the highs on transmit and then cut the highs back a little bit on receive to compensate for it. So the highs are where all of the clarity is. The lows is where the power is. So if you want to sound loud, big and brassy and the voice of God and authority, you bump the bass up. But the problem with that is you have to have a very, very clear circuit. And when I say circuit, I'm talking about DX circuit. I'm talking about between me and you, we're thousands of miles away. We've got QRM. If I can hear you and you're 10 over S9 and I don't have any QRM, yeah, you can turn the bass up and you sound bodacious. On the other hand, if if I've got an S1 signal on you and you're trying to work me, I'm a DX station. The best way for me to hear you is for you to crank your highs up and your bass down, because that's what's going to slice through. I need to hear your call letters. I'm not concerned about how wide the bandwidth is on your microphone, how glossy your audio is, that kind of thing.
And I think a great example of that is when we're on the air and we're calling CQ, all of a sudden we hear a big pile up occur. And who do we typically hear first? The YL station is the one to come through.
Well, there's actually two reasons. The first is females obviously have a higher pitch than a male voice. Okay, that's number one. So yes, that part is in agreement. The other part that very few people know, audio engineers know this, but the average layman does not know this. The voice, if you look at an oscilloscope, if you plug a microphone into an oscilloscope and you talk, if you're a male, you will see that positive peaks, sometimes the negative peaks, but one is higher, one has more amplitude than the other. And that's the phase of the audio. Male voices are what we call asymmetrical. They have more energy going in one direction versus the other direction, more positive versus negative, or more negative versus positive. A female voice is much more even. The top of a part of the sine wave is more equal to the bottom part of the sine wave. It is symmetrical, or it's more symmetrical. Okay, so that cuts through, and all of the radios have a compressor, a voice processor, also known as a limiter. And that limiter, think of the limiter as a governor on an engine. And so it tries to keep a soft sound. It brings up. It's like the guy with a mic gain inside. It's an automated thing. So if you're talking softly, it boosts up your mic gain. If you're talking too loud, it cuts it back down. It tries to keep it consistent between 90 and 100% modulation. Let's say. If it's a female voice, it has a very easy time doing that because it's consistent between the top half of the waveform and the bottom half. But a male voice will flip. So if you and I shared the same mic, you sat here in my studio and we shared the same mic and I put it on an oscilloscope, we would see a difference. Maybe yours would be more positive and mine might be more negative. Okay. So like CBS made professional broadcast boxes that would automatically sample the audio waveform, and they would flip a relay back and forth to change the phase. This goes back to AM broadcast days. And I know I'm giving you a whole bunch of stuff. I'm kind of scattering around a little bit, but eventually it all starts to make sense and you go, "Oh, now I got it." All of a sudden, SSB is a form of AM. It's just AM without the carrier and one sideband, but it's not FM. It's very close to AM. So we want it to be compressed. We want it to be loud and consistent. And so that's part of the reason why female voices cut through. If you listen to well, I don't know. I was going to say the gal from Russia. I can't think of her name now. She's a YouTuber. Raisa. And that's part of the, anatomy. A baby's cry, it's very high pitched, it's shrill. But a woman, a new mother can identify that particular baby out of you put 100 of them in a room, and she can hear. You put a blindfold on her, and she can tell. Yeah, it's that one over there. That's mine. Listen to a bird chirp sometime. A bird is when they sing, when they whistle, they if you look at the waveform, it's very sinusoidal. It looks like a sine wave, and it has uh, immense penetration, very little wattage, power coming out of the bird, and yet it travels a long distance. That's part of nature. That's by design. A flute, if you were to play a flute instrument, okay, that's also a sine wave. If you were to whistle, that's a sine wave. We use that all the time. So, those penetrate. If you once you start adding harmonics, you're taking away from the fundamental, and the harmonics use energy. You only let's say you only have 10 watts of power. The more harmonics that you put on it, you're spreading out that power density along a large area. And yes, it will sound better, but it doesn't penetrate. There's always a trade-off. It's a balancing act. You ever notice how Morse code CW cuts through and FT8 cuts through? They're they're super narrow. You can't put audio on them, but they're super narrow. That's why, because there's no harmonic energy. It's just that one signal. If I boost, let me see if I can hear myself here. If I boost my bass up, let me turn my cans on here so I can hear myself. Now I hear a little echo in my headset. If I were to boost my bass up like that, okay, and I cut my highs back, okay, so now I'm like FM broadcast. But if I added a bunch of noise, then it would be difficult to hear my call sign. Okay. On the other hand, if I put it normal, that's no bass and no cut, no boost on the bass, no cut, no boost on the highs. That's better. If I boost the highs, it becomes a little clearer. If I cut the bass, it becomes clearer still. Now it's penetrating. Okay, so let's see if I can demonstrate another thing called noise gate. So what I'm going to do, I've got an HF radio on in the background. Can you hear the hiss from that?
I sure can.
Okay. It should be not very quiet, but you know, enough that you can hear me, but it's there. It's kind of in the way.
That's great.
Okay. All right. I'm guessing at the levels. Okay. So I have this thing called a noise gate. And let me turn that off for a second. Okay. So what a noise gate does, it's kind of like squelch, but it's for your microphone. So if it sees a signal, it opens up, it allows your mic to work. And if it only hears that hiss, if it's below a certain threshold, it closes the gate, thereby disconnecting the microphone. Okay. So, and you have to, a little bit goes a long way. It's like cooking. It's like, with spices, you want a little bit to accentuate whatever the center of the dish is, but, not so much that you go, what am I eating fish? Am I eating steak? What is this? And so there's no noise gate now. So you hear me, you hear the hiss. And if I crank the noise gate up, you should hear that it's cutting in and out as I talk. As I talk close to the mic, you're hearing me, but when I pause, you don't hear that hiss. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, that's correct. Essentially, when the audio is picking up, you hear just a little bit of that noise.
Right, right. But when I pause, you hear nothing. That's the noise gate. If I turn the noise gate off, now you hear the hiss.
And I'm no stranger to having audio problems. I think before I've had problems in the past with the noise gate where I've set it too high and then it actually cuts out your audio or fades it away too quick.
Oh, yeah, yeah, because it takes a few milliseconds for that noise gate to open and then to close back up again. So you can be really aggressive with it and you can cut syllables out of your voice. Again, a little bit goes a long way. So it's the amount of noise gate, what we call the attack, how quickly does it open, and the release, how quickly does it close back up again. The box that I'm using, it is a professional broadcast box, but I'll walk through when the audio comes out of my mouth, it goes into a big microphone. The first thing it sees is 2 filters. One is a low pass, the other is a high pass. So I'm gonna adjust the low pass first here. So the low pass right now is allowing anything above maybe 150 cycles. If you listen to the bottom end, I'm going to turn it off. Now it'll go all the way down to 20 cycles. and my voice doesn't go down to 20 cycles, but you may hear if I tap the mic, you may hear some really low bass. And if I go the other way on the low end, so this is a filter. Now it's cutting off at about 300 cycles. Okay. And you can hear the bottom is gone now. So the reason why you would want to pre-filter, again, we've got a car that's 5 lanes wide and we're trying to put it down a 1 lane road. We need to chop off the super highs and the super lows. Get rid of them before we do anything with noise gates, compression, equalization, whatever. Um, because we got a round peg we're trying to put in a square hole. Okay. So you filter it out. Next thing would be the noise gate, which we just did. Once the noise gate, again, a little bit goes a long way. Don't be heavy-handed with it. The next thing is compression. Okay, so what's compression? So we've got a lot of terms, and they kind of all end up in the same basket. I'm going to see if I can make it simple. Um, if you take again a module that like the governor in a car, it's going to try to keep your speed. It's like cruise control in your car. Okay, you're going down a hill and you set it to 55. It'll stay at 55. You go up the hill, it's still going 55. It tries to be very consistent. So we have the same thing for your microphone audio. Okay, here's the difference. Um, Hams refer to it as a processor. That's what it says in the radio. Um, a processor, a compressor, a limiter, a I don't know. I was going to say clipper, but clipper is really, really tough. That's close, but not quite. Anyway, so AGC um, for my AMC, automatic modulation control, processor, compressor, limiter, those are all kind of synonymous. They all do the same thing. The difference is in the attack and release timings. The compression has a medium attack and a medium release. A processor has a much faster attack and a faster release. So think of that as like the suspension in your car. If you're driving a Cadillac, it's a nice, cushy ride, but it's a boat. It's not going to corner very well, but it's nice. It's a big sofa going down the highway. On the other hand, you're driving a little MG, it'll corner, you'll feel every little bump in the road, but it's not a nice, cushy ride. So again, there's that trade-off. So the little MG would be like the processor in the radio that's got a fast attack and a fast release. It's going to corner very well, but it's not too pleasing on the ears. Okay. Um, Whereas compression is much more easier on the ears, but it's not as loud. It doesn't penetrate. So you need a little bit of both. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff, a lot of pastas at the wall here. And that's me, because 'cause I've got so much to share.
Yeah, totally. Those analogies make a lot of sense. And one of the things I would throw out or ask would be, are ham radio microphones typically designed for quality, the gold
No,
standard,
they're
or
designed for being inexpensive. Price point. It's all about price point and being rugged because they're gonna be mobile, usually they're in a car. People like you and me and a lot of the upper end guys they'll use a real boom mic and a professional mic and maybe some, rack gear to sweeten the audio. 99% of the hams are not doing that, or maybe 90%. Maybe 10% are, 90% are not. Okay. Especially not if you're not going to bring rack gear if you're doing POTA, right? You're talking to a handheld mic. So you've got a cartridge in the microphone that probably costs the manufacturer maybe $1, and it's in a plastic box and it squeaks and you're handling it so the best thing you can do is where you put that microphone in relation to your mouth because you can't control the people talking around you, the siren blaring, the ambulance going down the road you're working, POTA, the birds up in the tree, whatever. There's all these other plane going overhead. You've got all these other noises. You don't have a noise gate and you can't control the environment. So the best thing you can do is talk loud and consistent into that microphone. Get it close to your mouth and turn the mic gain down to compensate so that the radio only hears what's coming out of your mouth. You're close talking that mic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And for anybody who might be listening at home that doesn't know, the mic gain is basically how sensitive your mic is, and you could adjust it higher or lower to
Yeah,
let more or less noise in.
yeah. If I bring back that noise, I'm not going to have it up as high as it was, and I have no noise gate now. Okay, no noise gate. But I talk far away from the mic and I bring up my level so that you can hear me. Okay, now try to make contact with me. Versus, versus right on top of the microphone, and I turn the gain down. Now all you hear is me, or you hear a little bit of hiss, but I'm the majority of the signal. Versus this, okay? So that's a good demonstration.
That's a great demonstration. And throughout this episode, I've been having to clear my throat and even speak louder to hear myself in the microphone. I'll find myself straining my voice because I'm so far back and just afraid I'm not being heard, or I really have to get up on the microphone like this.
Yep. Well, when we did our show, we always did it standing up. If you watch a TV show, you watch Frasier, you watch WKRP, they're sitting. And that's not the real world. We usually stood.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yep. We also wear headphones. You won't see KRP wearing headphones, right? Because that's show business, that's TV.
And it's really nice when you're working with audio if you have that ability to be able to get instant feedback on what you're hearing.
Yep.
It's so important, very very important. In that aspect too, the receive of the audio that you're listening to for feedback is just as important as your transmit. And what I mean by that is, if I have my audio receive turned back up all the way up so that when I'm talking I hear it, I'm getting a crackling effect. I'm thinking I'm over modulating, and then I start adjusting unnecessary transmitting settings.
Right.
I wanted to point that out because I did that. You know,
Okay, so you were asking about what you're listening to when you talk, how you hear yourself in the headphones. My comment on that is, are you listening to the sample within the radio? A lot of radios will have a monitor button, and you can then hear what's going into the microphone back in the headset. Um, that's better than nothing, comma, it's not a correct representation of what is on the air. What you really need for that is a separate receiver. So um, it's really good if you can get a hold of a second radio, and you only have to do it once. Get familiar with how it sounds, what it's doing. Tune to put your transmit radio into a dummy load. Don't do this on the air, please. Okay, um, and then listen with a second radio, um, and and plug your headphones into that receiving radio. And then you will hear, and you don't want an antenna on the second radio. You just want enough signal that leaks through the dummy load. You get the two radios side by side on the bench, and listen to yourself. It will be radically different because now you're hearing the second radio has sideband filters, it has equalization, it has all this other stuff going on inside. And that is what the guy at the other end is hearing. That's how he's hearing you. Okay.
that is a great tip. Having it into a
Yeah.
dummy load. But also, would you have it be a physical radio, or would something like an SDR be okay?
Oh, it doesn't matter as long as the bandwidth, if you use an SDR, the bandwidth has to be 2.7 wide. There's no point in fattening it up. You're undoing the whole test. You've got to simulate exactly what the guy on the other end is using. So let's pretend I'm going to talk about numbers for just a minute. Let's pretend that the receive radio the bass, it can only hear down to 300 hertz. And anything between 0 and 300, it just dumps it on the floor. You don't hear it at all, okay? So now my transmitter, I've got an equalizer that works at 200 hertz, and I keep boosting it up. I'm boosting it up, and now I'm at plus 10 dB at 200 hertz. Guess what? The receive radio doesn't hear it to begin with, so I'm just wasting energy. All I'm doing is I'm heating up the dummy load.
Yeah, makes a lot of
Right.
sense.
The guy at the other end of the circuit, I'm using air quotes here. The guy at the other end of the circuit, he's not hearing it because he's got that radio that is 0 to 300 hertz. It filters it out. He's only hearing 300 to 2.7 or 3,000. That's it. So that's the square peg that you have to put your round voice into. So you got I'll go back to the car analogy. You've got a one lane road. The car is 5 lanes wide, so we can narrow that up. If we use an SDR, that's like saying, okay, well now the lanes of the road are 3 lanes wide. No, 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 no. You've got to narrow that SDR up so that it's the same bandwidth as a standard radio. It's 1 lane. I'm not being specific on purpose. I don't want to lose people with the numbers part of it. It's just an analogy. Think of it. The sideband is relatively narrow. You know, why does this sound louder than this does? All I'm doing is cupping my hands. There's no equalization. Okay, it's the same voice. It's the same Hollywood. But there's the cupped hands. There's without. One is DX. One is not. When you're talking to your girlfriend across the football field and she can't hear you and you start waving your arms, what's the first thing you "Hey, sweetheart," you know? There's the megaphone and she hears you. It's that simple.
And I'll insert that megaphone photo right here too.
Yeah,
But that's absolutely correct.
yeah,
You're not you're not adding any more power to it or wattage to it.
right.
Wait, you're not adding any more wattage to it. You're narrowing the signal to direct it
Yes, you're directing it
specifically
like a Yagi would.
like a
Right.
Yagi. Yep,
Mhm.
absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. There's also another part of it that the megaphone doesn't just focus it, it also becomes a resonant cavity. It boosts the mids, cuts the lows, cuts the highs. That's okay. So it's doing a little bit of equalization also. And it slices through. Very effective. When you have someone that's hard of hearing, what do? They put their hands behind their ears. They cup their ears. It does the exact same thing in reverse.
Is there any this is completely unrelated to audio, but maybe it's not, so that's why I'm asking.
Sure.
Is there any significance to that? Remember the game when you were a kid and you would have a string with two cans on it,
Yeah.
and you would hold it up to hear, and somebody would talk in it, and
How
you
do you
would.
think I started in radio?
That's right.
But nobody would listen.
But
I had a limited audience of one. I think the most important lesson in all of this is you have to listen to yourself, okay, and not rely on what other people tell you. Here's the problem. Most people that give you oh, your microphone sounds terrible. Well, that's I get it. Some of them are truly trying to help. Not all. There are some people that want you to sound bad so that they sound better. Okay. So there's that aspect of it. I hate to even throw that out there, but we all know that type of person. Okay. Um, the other thing is you have to take into account that even if the person on the other end is truly trying to help you, they have a limited skill set. They may not be an audio engineer. They may be listening again on a very narrow band radio, narrower than normal sideband. They may be wearing a hearing aid. They may have the dog barking, the XYL in the other room with the TV cranked up. Okay. They've got all this other distraction noise. They cannot focus and they're not wearing headphones. They're listening to you on a speaker. We don't know the condition of the speaker. It may be a little 3-inch speaker like what's built into these radios. You know, I happen to use, I have a subwoofer and I have two monitor speakers. So I'm hearing exactly what's coming out of the radio. And in fact, I'm wearing headphones right now. So you have to take all of those into account. So I would suggest eliminate all of that. And then you've got the bias of the person too. So eliminate all of that, listen to it yourself, and do it off air into a dummy load, borrow another radio, use an SDR, whatever, and plug headphones in and listen to it. And there'll be a millisecond delay. It's distracting. I get it. Um, and then there's also, you got to crank the audio up too, because, if you, we've all encountered this. Someone comes along with a tape recorder. Oh my goodness, he's an old man. A tape recorder. What's a
I don't
cassette
sound
recorder?
like
What's
that,
that?
do I?
Um, no, that's me. It's not digital. Oh no. Um, so the first time you hear your voice, you go, "Oh, there's something wrong with your machine. That's
Yeah,
not how I
exactly.
sound." Yes, it is. Yes, it is exactly how you sound. You don't think so because you're hearing your voice, also what's going through the air, but also what's in your head. The vibrations from your larynx are going through your skull and they're vibrating your ears. Okay? So that's another reason why an announcer, a professional announcer, a lot of them have hearing loss because they crank those headphones way up. We've all heard squeal, we've all heard feedback from the headphones. That's why, because they're overcoming the voice in their head. They want to hear mostly what the audience is hearing, not what's in their head. Okay. So for that one time, crank the headphones up a little bit louder than you normally would. Really focus on what you're listening to and go for clarity, not, professional FM broadcast. This is AM. Sideband is very close to AM and it's narrow. The other thing I want to go back to is the telephone. If you look at the handset on the phone, how it's angled at a 45-degree to your voice, to your mouth rather. Um, if you put your hand in front of your mouth and you talk and you say, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, okay? You feel the wind blowing against your fingers. Um, if you put the microphone 90 degrees to your mouth, alongside your mouth. Now you're talking across the microphone, and you're also going to get wind noise. You don't get the impact, but you get the breath going across the mic. You want to talk at a 45-degree angle. That's the optimum. And if you look at an old-fashioned handset from a real dial telephone from AT&T, you put it up to your ear. That's made so that that microphone is at a 45-degree and it's about two finger widths away from your lips. That's by design. And they did it very intentionally because people didn't know how close do I talk? How far away can I talk? And those were also carbon microphones. They needed, they had very limited bandwidth, but they cut right, they sliced right through. In fact, in my opinion, a lot of them sound superior to the cell phones that we use today, which are wide as a barn door. They go out to 6 kilohertz, maybe 7 kilohertz, but you've got all this other noise. Put somebody on speaker sometime and then try to listen to them. And, it's terrible. So those microphones in the old telephones were designed to have very little bass response. So there's your filter. Before it even gets to Ma Bell, it's being filtered by the phone. Okay. And then it gets to Ma Bell, it gets amplified, it gets compressed. They also boost the highs to overcome the noise in the circuit as it goes between, Massachusetts and Los Angeles. Okay, it has to make many hops. So every time it hops, it loses something. It's like making a Xerox copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. This is before digital, kids. This is analog stuff. You make a take a cassette, record somebody talking, and then play back the cassette into another machine, put a microphone from machine two onto the speaker of the playback of number one, make a copy. That's your second generation. Do it again and again and again. Do about 10 generations. At the end of 10 generations, you can't understand a damn thing the person's saying. It's very simple. Okay. It's yeah, it goes away. So Ma Bell knows that, and that's the Fletcher Munson curve. They boost the highs, they cut the lows to slice through. There are so many really, really good videos that are on YouTube that show that. There's one that comes to mind from Dr. Bose at MIT, and he discusses that he's playing a piece of classical music and on a on a very high end stereo system, and he's recorded it on a reel to reel tape deck with a very professional microphone, and he plays back the reel to reel, and it sounds glorious. Okay, that's the first generation. Then he takes that tape and he plays it back through the first, stereo system, and he makes another copy. And he does that about 15 times. And by the end of it, all you hear is you can't even tell what the symphonic piece is, let alone hear any instruments. It's like a ring filter, a ring modulator. It sounds like Morse code. It's so narrow banded, you can't tell what the piece is. I'll see if I can find you the link for that if you're curious.
I'm curious, and I'm thinking of an analogy in my head, but it's not quite there, I don't think. But as you're continuing, if as you're continuing on with the signal and it continues on and continues on, it's becoming more and more and more narrow. Did I get that part correct?
Yeah, you do.
Okay.
So let's go to the Xerox. Everybody's seen a Xerox,
Right.
right?
And as you
Okay,
copy
so
it one time, it's
you t
clear, and then 300
yeah,
times later, it's like kind of black, or it's
it's
just
then it goes gray,
right.
and there's no image left. If you
And
go 100 times, it's just a gray piece of paper.
And then if I were to take it into coax, and this isn't necessarily the best analogy in the world too, but the longer you go down the line with coax, the more loss you're going to have. And I only say that in the sense of you lose something the longer it goes on.
That's true. That's
It's
true.
not a great analogy.
What goes in, not all of it comes out the other end.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow.
That's correct.
That's
And then there's also reflections within the coax. That's your SWR. And those reflections will filter certain frequencies in and out. I mean, you won't hear it on HF. I probably shouldn't have said that because a lot of people are going, no, 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 you're wrong. But in the days of analog TV, for the older crew here, like myself, analog TV, um, we've all seen ghosting in the video picture, and that can be caused by SWR in the transmission line because it's a reflection.
This is great, actually. And that's another thing that somebody should consider is if you have higher SWR, you're getting that reflection back into your radio or your equipment, and therefore you might be causing artifacts on your audio that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, you would need miles of coax for it to happen on
Oh,
HF.
okay.
So in physics, yes, you're correct. In the lab, you're correct. In the real world, nobody's going to measure it. You're not going to be able to hear it.
It's so minute.
Yes,
Minute. There we go.
minute. Yes.
Minute. Thank you.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you ever consider it to be an issue on VHF or UHF, or would we really have to start getting into microwave
Microwave.
frequencies? Yeah, microwave.
Microwave. Yes.
But that's great.
Because it's the ratio of the wavelength that you're transmitting on to the length of the coax and how bad is the SWR on the transmission line. How bad are the reflections, but how many reflections? And then where is your sample point from the beginning of the hose to the end of the hose? Where is the reflection happening? Where are you measuring from?
That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, that
And
makes
it's true with audio, it's true with RF. They're very analogous.
yeah, I could definitely tell that after just talking to you today for this hour or so.
Once you see it, you almost can't unsee it.
Right.
Professor Walter Lewin at MIT, one of his last lectures that he did before he retired, he said, "This is a disease." because I've now uncovered it for you, and you almost need the eye bleach to unsee it. Once you see it for what it is, you almost can't unsee it. When you look at a rainbow and you understand how the rainbow is formed, you have so much more appreciation. It's like art, it's not it's magic at that point. Oh, there's so much to cover, and I did sometimes I went down a rabbit hole, and I apologize for that. I hope I didn't confuse anybody, but there's so much to learn. Never stop learning. Listen to yourself. That's the probably the best advice I can give you. Critique yourself. If you cook, you sample the food before it makes it to the table. You adjust for seasoning. Same thing with the audio. Listen to yourself, be your own worst critic, and make it work, and then present it. You know what? Can I just share this with you? This is the quote that I actually wrote this down. But it was so moving to me. This is Professor Walter Lewin. I'm going to quote him. This is like a disease. You can't resist it, and it's all my fault. I cannot cure you anymore. It's too late for that. This is a disease for life. But all this joy and fun that you will get over and above the everlasting beauty of the bows, he's talking about the rainbow lecture that he did. You will see much more than people who do not have the knowledge that you have now, and therefore the experience for them will be rather shallow. Knowledge always adds, knowledge never subtracts. Knowledge is hidden beauty. Your life will never be the same. Yeah, it's Professor Walter Lewin. He was a physics teacher at MIT. His videos are on YouTube. Watch them sometime. I also have his book. I'm not. I don't know the guy, but he was so well done in his presentation. It really moved me. So
I'll get a link in the description below. That way, in case anybody has this disease, as we call it, they can go ahead and check it out for themselves. And hey, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to teach us a little bit about audio.
absolutely, well, I'm happy to do it anytime. Anytime. I've got an encyclopedia of. I'm not bragging, but I in in the 60 years, well, I've been on the air for 40 years. I've gathered a whole bunch of you would not know it hearing my voice now, folks. I've been out of the I've been out of the business for a while, a long while, and I'm glad that I'm retired out of it. I've got my sound like Massachusetts, Cape Quad, you know. So
Well, since it was brought up, let me ask you just one more question, if you don't mind. And that would be with broadcasting or with news anchors, they typically tend to target a certain region or dialect or accent.
it's
Is that
called
correct?
it's called General American Speech. I went to Emerson College, and in the freshman year, we had a class called Voice and Articulation, and this is where Hollywood got his voice. You're hearing a little bit of the professional voice because I'm turning it back on, and you're hearing a little bit of the regionalism. So here I am as a freshman. I come in, and the instructor says, one at a time in a class of 50 or whatever, stand up and state your name and tell us why you're here. I'll give you 60 seconds. And we all did this. And then she pointed to us, she said, "You're from so and so location." And I mean, she had it down to the corner of the state or the country. This lady knew her stuff just by the inflection and the dialect. And I said, "Oh my God, this lady's a genius. I better pay attention." Okay, so at the towards the end of the class, to get rid of the localized things that you have, and to get towards the general American speech, there is a phonetic alphabet that actors use. It is not the Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta stuff that hams use. It is very cryptic. It looks like Latin or a different language entirely. Okay, what it is it it is how you actually form the words. Once you, and I've forgotten it now, but once you learn that language, you say a word. I say car. Okay. I say car. Okay. I'm from Boston. Boston. It's car. Okay. So the teacher goes up to the blackboard and she writes how it sounds to her. And then she writes, "This is how I want you to say it." And I say it that way because now I know the alphabet and I say car, car. Okay, great. And once I do that repeatedly, I get it right. The beauty of this is if I'm an actor, I'm on stage, I can't speak a lick of French, I can't speak German, I can't speak Italian, but you know what? I have this now language and it is spelled out for me in the script, and I speak fluent German. I don't know what I'm saying, but I sound correct. That's what actors do. That's how they're able to get these other inflections and dialects localized, very localized. It's a wonderful tool. But that's general American speech. So when you hear the old Walter Cronkites, when you hear, the announcers from the 20s, 30s, 40s on AM radio, they all sounded the same because they all went to the same type of school, broadcast school, and they did it for clarity because the AM signal at night, as we all know, goes all over the country. So you don't want to sound, like you're a hillbilly from, from Cape Cod. You want to sound like you're the voice of authority. This is CBS, kids. This is RCA. This is ABC. This is Mutual. You know, you want to sound like you are covering the nation. Even more so if you work at the VOA, the Voice of America.
Hey, I just wanted to thank you for coming on here today. It's really an awesome thing. And really, if anybody has any questions or comments, concerns, just let us know in the comments below and I'll make sure they get to the right spot. But Hollywood, thanks again. And do you have any final words of advice?
Stay out of broadcasting.
That sounds good to me.
Stay sane, stay out of broadcast.
uh,
It's a vicious,
yeah.
vicious business.
Well, I'm certain it's a good point. But thanks again for coming on today and helping us all out.
Anytime. Happy to do it.